The Russian Ministry of Defense has reported the largest-scale attack by Ukrainian FPV drones on targets in the Russian Federation. The Russian ministry's report mentioned 15 regions attacked by drones. However, they were later joined by another 16th region. The report of the Russian military department, of course, emphasizes that all drones were destroyed, but subsequent reports refute this information from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. For example, Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin emphasized that the drone damaged the technical room of the Moscow Oil Refinery, and a fire broke out, which is being localized. Mikhail Shuvalov, the head of the Kashira city district, said that the drones tried to attack the Kashira hydroelectric power plant. In the Tver region, a fire was reported near the Konakovskaya hydroelectric power plant, one of the largest power plants in the central part of the Russian Federation. Subsequently, more and more new consequences of FPV drone strikes on the territory of Russian infrastructure facilities were reported. For example, Russian publics have posted videos of a strike on the territory of the Konakovo hydroelectric power plant, which resulted in a fire. There was also video evidence of an attack by one of the drones on the Moscow Oil Refinery, which also started a fire. Later, it was emphasized that the fire was localized. This information was followed by new information that the fire had been extinguished in the Tver region, exactly where the Konakovo hydroelectric power plant is located. Thus, we can state that Kyiv can now respond to attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure with attacks on Russian infrastructure. This is a rather important change in the logistics of the Russian-Ukrainian war. We talk a lot about how Russia is taking systematic measures to destroy Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. And of course, we pay special attention to how Russian troops, on Putin's orders, are trying to occupy new settlements on the territory of Ukraine, in particular in the Donetsk region, where fierce fighting is currently taking place. However, the nature of the war can only change if peace enforcement measures are implemented on the territory of the Russian Federation itself. Of course, it is possible to stop Russian troops somewhere on the line of contact with the Ukrainian armed forces, to ask our allies for new air defense systems that will be able to protect Ukrainian infrastructure facilities from attacks by Russian missiles and drones, to build a kind of Iron Dome. But this will not end the war, because Russia will believe that it can accumulate forces for a new offensive against Ukraine, for new attacks on infrastructure, and find weaknesses in Ukrainian air defense. Thus, the war will not tend to end in the foreseeable future. And this is exactly the kind of war we have been talking about since February 2022, when President Putin decided to destroy Ukrainian statehood and annex Ukrainian territories to the Russian Federation. The nature of this war changed when Putin realized that the entire territory of Ukraine could not be occupied by his troops, but this decision led to his attempts to turn Ukraine into an infrastructure desert. And what is the solution? Turn Russia into an infrastructure desert. To control the territories in the Russian Federation itself, to create so-called small cuts for Russians, to deprive the population of opportunities for normal existence, and the Russian troops of resources to continue the war. This includes the destruction of Russia's oil refining industry, an increase in oil and fuel prices in Russia itself, which will lead to a significant deterioration in the living standards of ordinary Russians. This could lead to destabilization, and Putin could be forced to think about the need to end the war. Thus, destabilization within the Russian Federation is a key factor that could force Putin and his entourage to reconsider their military ambitions. Today, Russia is trying to demonstrate that it is in control of the situation, but the reality is becoming less and less favorable for the Russian authorities. Attacks on infrastructure, persistent fires, and energy supply disruptions are making life increasingly difficult for ordinary Russians. When an ordinary person is confronted with the realities of war, which he or she had previously perceived only as something distant, they begin to realize that politics directly affects their daily existence. The fact that Ukrainian drones are reaching strategic targets deep inside Russia shows that even the most sophisticated propaganda cannot hide the true extent of the war. Russian society, albeit under the strong influence of state censorship, is gradually beginning to face the consequences of the war, which their authorities call a special military operation. The real consequences of this operation go beyond Ukraine's borders and affect Russia itself. One of these consequences is economic pressure, which is increasing due to international sanctions and internal problems. The deteriorating economic situation, rising fuel prices, and shortages of goods and services are all directly affecting the quality of life of ordinary Russians. With Russia already spending huge amounts of money to support the war, a reduction in budgetary capacity to finance social programs could become another important factor in internal tensions. It is also important to understand that the Russian elite, which supports Putin, is beginning to feel pressure not only from the international community, but also from its own population. The deteriorating economic situation and social unrest could lead to a split within the ruling class, weakening Putin's position. The absence of significant victories on the front line, constant losses, and the exhaustion of resources may provoke internal conflicts within the president's environment that will sooner or later become apparent. All this creates conditions for a possible revision of approaches to war. Russia, which until recently believed that it could drag out the conflict indefinitely and gradually gain an advantage, now finds itself in a situation where continuing the war is becoming increasingly difficult. When resources are exhausted and the population begins to feel the negative effects of the war on their own lives, this leads to growing discontent and social instability. Therefore, the answer to the question of how to end this war lies not only in Ukraine's military victories, but also in how to change the internal situation in Russia. FPV drones, infrastructure strikes, and economic sanctions are all creating preconditions for reducing Russia's ability to continue the war. Pressure on the Russian leadership from its own people, who can no longer ignore the consequences of Putin's policies, may force it to look for ways to end the conflict. This process may be long and difficult, but the first signs of change are already visible. The large-scale drone attack on the territory of the Russian Federation is intended to show Russians that the war is not limited to Ukraine, it is coming to their land, to their homes. And when Russian cities begin to face the lack of light and heat in winter, politics will no longer be something abstract for them. It will come into their lives, as it has already happened in Ukraine. So with this in mind, it is worth emphasizing the importance of international support for Ukraine. If the Allies allow Ukraine to strike critical infrastructure in Russia, it will accelerate the Russians' understanding of the real danger of continuing this war. This could make Putin think twice about whether to continue fighting when the pressure from within is getting stronger. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it. This video was prepared by the Hustler channel, and see you soon.